Well, welcome everybody to a new edition of Right Aligned featuring Alex Hills. This is in our sort of creative careers theme that we do every now and then, looking at people's their past and how they got to where they are right now, and really picking out bits and pieces from those stories just to hopefully inspire and empower anybody that gets to watch this afterwards. So, Alex, if it's possible, just to quickly let us know a little bit about yourself, and then take us back to whether it's childhood, education, whatever it is that sparked creativity with you, and just run us through your
Yeah.
career to date, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, for sure. So, hi, I'm Alex. I currently am working as an integrated designer at a big agency based in London called Oliver. But took me a while to get there. My sort of creative journey started probably when I was a lot younger. I mean, my parents have said since I could draw before I could walk. I know it's such a cliche, but apparently I could. And yeah, I was very sort of like pushy with my art. I used to try and show it to everyone as a child, and that just sort of carried on throughout my education. When I was at school, I, you know, took part in so many different art programs. And then when I was applying for universities, I thought I wanted to go down the fine art route. So I ultimately chose to go to Lancaster Uni to study fine art. And I think that was a decision based on the fact that I wanted to get as far away as possible from where I was from and just wanted to try something new. Realised it wasn't for me. And the next year went to Loughborough University to study graphic communication and illustration. I spent about 2 years there, sort of practicing my craft and really playing around with ideas that interested me. And then went on placement and did that at Debenhams in 2019. COVID hit and sort of the world went a bit crazy. We weren't quite sure what was happening with Debenhams. And I ultimately decided to stay on an extra year. So I deferred university to stay on. I was given a lot of opportunities there to sort of get really involved in the big campaigns that they were doing. So I thought it was the right decision for me. And after choosing to do that 3 months in, we all lost our jobs. And I was lucky enough to secure a place at a agency based in Leicester called Mint. But it was quite a tough decision for me to sort of pivot my journey. I was thinking I would go back to uni in a year, but actually now I had just landed the job that I would want to get out of university. So I wasn't sure what I was going to do there, but ultimately chose not to return to uni and have continued working ever since.
Wow, that's seems like a hell of a lot in a short period of time.
Yeah.
What? So I think the idea of getting us far away from home life with university is very appealing to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And that independence, did you find that really helped from a personal perspective, that not necessarily from a creative perspective or professional, just from a personal perspective, open your eyes up and allowed you to sort of feel that independence more?
Yeah, I mean, I'm the eldest of five, so I think I've always been quite a independent person. But yeah, I think like at that time, I was definitely more focused on sort of going to uni for the experience of uni rather than actually considering where I want my sort of career to go. And at that time, I was so set in my ways of being like fine art, fine art, fine art. My mum was telling me another thing, which is we laugh about it now, but my mum's always right. And she was telling me, you need to go to Loughborough, this course, the graphics course is for you. This is what you need to be doing. And I think I just went against her and made the wrong decision and ended up going there a year later anyway.
It's a little bit off topic, but I think there needs to be a bit more, especially for creative people, maybe a bit more education around what university entails from a learning perspective. Because I think if you went into, say, business or science, it's quite academic and it's very set and probably quite easy to understand what's involved. But I think from a creative,
Yeah,
so
completely.
many different factors, aren't there?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think when you're studying, say, something more like law or any science, it's a lot more regimented and there's a more clear structure to it. But I think with art and creativity in general, it's so broad and there probably needs to be a bit more consideration for that and a bit more like openness about that when you are looking for universities. And I know that like universities do degree shows every year, and I think there needs to be more exposure on what the course entails.
Yeah, I think from an outside perspective, I don't have too much knowledge from internally. It feels like you just go and be creative, which I think when you then think about the industry and what you need from a professional perspective on a day-to-day basis, that luxury isn't always there, is it? You have to be much more structured in your day, and you set tasks. You have to deal with a lot of different moving parts, as opposed to just getting 6 weeks just to go and have fun. It's not quite like that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I think it's quite a big task, but by some of the things that are here, I think it'd be quite good to give people much more knowledge about what they're going to be needed to do when they're there. When you then had a placement at Debenhams, that must have been a real eye opener and exciting time to, you sort of see the real workings of an in-house studio.
Yeah, I mean, I've always wanted to be in London. I think I love the lifestyle in general. I grew up relatively close to London, so I remember coming in as a kid quite a lot and being like, oh, this is so exciting. So yeah, when I got my first professional job at Debenhams, although it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do, it really gave me sort of an eye opener to, like, the workings of an office, working with other creative people, and really getting to know, like, the hierarchy of a design team, which was really, really important for me, and something that universities don't tend to teach too much. So yeah, that was really, really interesting and exciting for me.
It's a completely different beast, wasn't it? Being in a
Yeah. Completely.
How did you find that? Was that overwhelming? Did you just seamlessly sort of slide into it?
I mean, at first, definitely overwhelming. Like, everyone's nervous to start a new job regardless. But I mean, when you're going in as an intern, I think for me, the best bit of advice I can give anyone is just showing up, and that's all you can do. I made a point of always being early so that I got sort of a bit of time with, the senior designers and the design directors. And I wasn't the best designer there by any means, but I was always, because I made the effort to always show up and always say yes to things, I was then given, like, all these opportunities, which I was very, very grateful for. Yeah, I loved it there.
That look like, for anybody that gets to watch this, that's maybe in your or is just about to step into that environment, or is looking for a placement? I'm sure it's getting even more difficult. Industries just seem to be so fast-paced and busy all the time that whether they still have
Yeah.
it. What were the benefits that you got from that? You think that were really valuable in hindsight for the next phase of your life?
I mean, just being able to sort of, like, present your work in a way that is, well, presenting your work to people that don't necessarily understand design or understand the thinking behind it. I mean, at university, you're surrounded by all these other creatives that will just know what you're talking about. But when you're having to present work to, say, marketing managers or other execs that aren't from a creative background, sometimes they might need a little bit more explanation with it. So I think for me, that was, like, a really big, useful thing in my first job, was the understanding of how to present your work and how to talk about it.
Now, I think that's a really interesting point, wasn't it? Because there is a tendency, and I've done it hundreds of times, where you take a brief or you do something self-initiated, but you go off and hide yourself in a dark room and be creative.
Yeah.
And then you think everybody's going to understand what you're thinking without necessarily showing it. You think, oh, this is the best thing in the world ever. Everybody's just going to say, yeah, signed off. Here's a big paycheck.
Yeah.
Understanding that, how that system works, that the idea that somebody from accounts or front of house or general management, like you say, aren't from that background. They're much more number driven or analytical, and they just
Yeah.
they need it to be black and white, don't they? So I think focusing on things that aren't just necessarily the craft or sitting in front of a Mac, understanding how what you create works in the world, has it
Yeah.
needs to be explained, doesn't it? And that must play also now when you're in an agency such as Oliver. That must be a huge part of their processes, isn't it? Is how to pitch or how to explain or sort of get people on board and take them with them. Do you find that you've got that now? It's a different level now, isn't it, when you're in an agency?
Oh, completely. Because when you're working in house, obviously you get to know everyone on quite a personal level. But at Oliver, I'm constantly pushed to different teams, so I have to adapt quite quickly to sort of their team environment. So, you know, I might have a really premium client who, you know, you have to dress a certain way and, you know, talk about the work in a certain manner, and then you'll have someone that's a lot more, you know, relaxed, and, you know, you can be a bit more fun and humorous and creative, like with your creative in that. But yeah, just knowing how to like talk to different clients is so important.
Is that a step that you have organically got used to and developed yourself, from a personal perspective? It's not all just about the work and the professional side. I think personal development
Yeah, yeah.
gets overlooked a lot, isn't it? Is that something that
Mhm.
you've just found, you found it confident and you've become at ease with that, or did you have to go through any specific steps to learn that, how to do that?
Um, yeah, I mean, like 2 or 3 years ago when I was at my previous agency, Mint, I didn't really have the skills or the confidence to present, but I was very lucky that there was another senior designer there, who kind of took me under his wing and was sort of helped me come up with like a little bit of a script before we would go into a client meeting, and he would say, you'll talk about this section, and if you miss anything out, do not worry, I'll mention it. So he was very, very supportive, and I think it was just sort of listening to how he spoke to clients and sort of watching other people present to clients. I've just sort of absorbed it all, and now where I am, I try and pass on that knowledge as well, to sort of the younger members of the team who are just starting off, who haven't done any client work yet, but might sometimes be in on a meeting just to be able to watch,
Yeah, I think
how
having
others talk.
that support network within a team, whether it's in-house or client side, agency side, sorry, that there's not
Oh,
much.
it's so important.
Yeah, there's not much said or written about it, is there? But I think it's
No.
really, really important to have, whether it's like a mentor or just somebody that's a little bit more senior that can guide you with that chain. And
Yeah.
also people within those roles sort of just doing it is important as well, isn't it? Not to be sort of, not to be given a title to say they're going to teach somebody. You just having those people that are just willing to help one another for the benefit of the bigger team or the project is so important.
Yeah, definitely. Completely
Have you,
agree.
have you found that for the places that you have been, like, it's quite common then, like Debenham was
Yeah, yeah. I've not, so I've worked at 4 places professionally, and I've not once felt like there's been any sort of disjoint or disconnect from, you know, senior members of the team to junior members of the team. I'm in the middle right now. I'm a midweight designer. But yeah, I've everywhere I've worked, there's always been sort of a very good community of people and designers. And I think chatting to some of the senior designers I know, it wasn't like this before. It used to be very much like, nope, we're not dealing with you kind of attitude, but now it's completely shifted. And I think there's a lot of support for people that are just starting out their careers, whether they've come from university or not.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to hear. It's great to see as well. I've seen both sides of it, and
Mm,
it's really nice to see that people like yourself and even younger creators have been given that network where it's not really as self-centered as it used to be. It used to be about
yeah.
prioritizing yourself above all else, and that's now seems quite horrific to think that's how it was, and but it
Hmm.
just was. So you can't do much about what's been, but to know that we can then improve the future for everybody is
Yeah,
really,
definitely.
really exciting. Just you touched upon there. You've worked at 4 places, and you're now midway. When you went from a placement in from within the student realm, within university, and then I presume you then went to junior before you got to midway. Were there any factors that you thought you were out, you now felt ready to take that step up? Because I think it's something, again, that's another topic that doesn't get spoke about, and it's not something that you
Yeah.
can easily quantify. But was there just something internally that you just felt, I'm ready for that?
Um, I think part of it's half of it is I'm ready for it, and half of it is just take the jump, because you don't know until you try or until you're put in those situations. And the only way you're kind of going to be put in situations that are higher than your level is to apply for a job and accept a job that is higher than your level. So for me, I've in the last year of working at Oliver, my something I really struggled with was presentation and, talking to clients. But in the last year, I've improved on that immensely. and I feel a lot more confident in it. And although my skill level was probably a midweight, my presentation and pitching skills were not there. But I think part of it is just taking that jump, taking the leap. And, you know, if you need to ask for some extra support with, you know, for me, it was presentations, but if you need to ask for extra support, there's no wrong in that. Like, you can't be expected to, you know, work at one level forever and just not expect the next jump that you won't need support either. So I think it's okay to still ask for help, even if you are at a different level.
I think secretly, don't tell anybody, but I think the higher you get up, the more support you need.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard this.
That's how I feel. You seem to go from 100% creativity to 75, 50%, 25% to virtually zero when you get to that sort of senior director level. And that's when you feel quite disconnected, because that's all you knew. You spent 15 years designing, and now you're being asked to manage teams, paperwork, and clients. And it's sort of, you need a real, again, that goes back to the support network. If you've got great people around you can trust, respect, you know, that's really important. And I think what you mentioned there is a really interesting perspective, is that to move to junior, midweight, senior, and whatever else lies in between or beyond, is not just necessarily about how good you are with software or with you know, it's about interaction. It's about leading people, about leading clients, trust, like getting them to trust you and the ideas of your team. That's really interesting, actually, for other people to see that or think like that. You know, maybe going outside of your comfort zone and developing personally without being paid for it. So, you know, in your spare time, learning to talk in situations like this, they're things that you can really add to your CV and be really proud and confident to do.
Definitely. I mean, like, I'm sort of got an action plan in my head for the next 2 years of progressing to a senior level, obviously. And like recently I've started sort of mentoring a few people outside of work, just sort of helping with like CV and portfolio advice. And yeah, it's going okay, but I think like having that, you know, time to do that kind of thing outside of work will be really, really helpful for when I am ready to move up in my career.
Yeah, and I think from an employer's perspective, having those skill sets is really, really beneficial, you know, for a business, especially in an industry like ours, where there is so much public-facing work needs to be done. You know, whether it's writing case studies or creating, you know, visuals that look good online that concisely describe a detailed project. If you can do all of those sorts of things and represent the company that you work for, I think that's just as valuable as being able to design or being able to strategize or, you know, do concepts or whatever it might be. Looking at when the high street collapsed and that's never quite recovered and played people out and went with it, that must have been, I suppose now in hindsight, probably quite not, I wouldn't say necessarily good experience, but it's something that you've got knowledge of. But at the time, how was that, you know, mentally, physically? It must have been really difficult.
Gosh, yeah. I mean, back then I was going through all sorts of like, you know, scenarios in my head. I was thinking, gosh, I'm losing my job. I've got 6 months until uni starts again. What am I going to do in those 6 months? And then on the other hand, I was like, oh, I'll allow myself, you know, 3 months to try and apply for jobs. If no one wants me because I haven't got a degree, I'll go back to uni. And I think there is that real sort of, at that time, though, for me anyway, there was that real pressure of you must have a degree if you want a creative career, when actually it's completely changed, and careers aren't degrees aren't the be all and end all anymore. There's so many people I know that haven't got degrees that have had really, really successful creative careers. But at that time, I think I still had it in my head, like, I have to go back to uni. Otherwise, you know, no agency will look twice at me if I haven't got a degree.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a problem, isn't it? That sort of psychology that we've been sort of conditioned to believe that is the only way to get accepted, which is hopefully is slowly shifting. Well, it'd be nice if it shifted faster. I think people are becoming, like you say, people to realise that it's maybe just a word and not much else. You know, it's you know, it comes with a heavy cost, let alone the time it takes. It doesn't necessarily put
yeah. I mean, I've got all the cost and no degree.
You double whammy. You've got the worst of both sides.
No.
Was there a so when you first went into somewhere like Debenhams as as your first experience, all positive, really exciting, nervous but exciting times. When you got to that part when it was becoming evident that it was going downhill, did you experience sort of any negative, not the opposite of when you first went in, because people knew what was coming, or was it maybe just completely oblivious and it just happened? How did it
I
look?
mean, the atmosphere and like the mood of everyone changed as it would. But I think the people I worked with were all really lovely. Everyone was so supportive of each other. So I think as horrible as what was going on, I don't think it was, nothing that we can all support each other on either. I mean, our creative director at the time was so lovely. He told us, just if you have any interviews, take them. Don't worry about the time. If you've got to spend time on your portfolio and CV, do that. If you can't design like an email, it doesn't matter, because just focus on you and what you need to do during this time. So I think, yeah, as stressful as it was, like I was very lucky that the team was still so lovely. Even the extended team, like all the marketing directors, but still also lovely, and just sort of focused on their staff rather than, we must finish this work and that kind of attitude. They didn't have that at all.
Still remain while the ship's burning, sort of type mentality. I think it's really reassuring that I think majority of us know that there's a hell of a lot of decent people out there, but I think the state of media at the minute we sort of get projected that everybody's in it for themselves and everybody's horrible.
Yeah.
It's really reassuring to hear so many positive stories of people, especially you take all this stuff away, we're still all just people out there with the same as each other. We're just got to look out for each other more often. And I think a lot of that, it does happen. It's just sometimes we get a skewed view of it. I'm really interested because you didn't go back to university and you continued in industry. From a personal perspective, what was that like I can only imagine from what a family view of that was. That must be something, a big hurdle to overcome, the expectations of what other people that aren't in your shoes expect.
Yeah, I mean, in all honesty, I'm quite lucky. I have a very supportive family, and I'm gonna go back to my mum again. She said, "Don't go back," and I was like, "I have to go back," and she was like, "Don't go back. Trust me, you're gonna be absolutely fine. You've just landed this job at Mint, and your career is about to start for you." And at the time, again, I was still like, "No, no, no, I've got to go back." But again, she was right, because she always is.
Well, again, great to have that support.
Yeah, I know, like I am one of the lucky ones. I know a few people from school that, wanted to pursue art or do a creative career, and their families were like, there's no money in it. But there is. You can very much have a successful creative career and make money.
It's preconception of a lot of people. I hear that quite a lot, especially from certain cultures and backgrounds. Certain people face extreme pressure, but there are a hell of a lot of people that work in design. And they have a very nice career, and just sort of a great way to express yourself if you're that way inclined. If that's part of who you are, your DNA. It's definitely a rewarding place to be. So when you went to Mint, that was not too far from Loughborough, is it? In terms of Leicester, is it?
No, it wasn't. So I went back to Loughborough during COVID. I couldn't afford to stay in my London flat. So I moved back to Loughborough just because I thought, well, I'm going to be there soonish for uni. I may as well just get a little flat there already. And then, ended up getting, the job at Mint, which was based in Leicester. So still pretty local.
Was that a good experience in terms of, just being in a different space away from from what you'd known before, again, going back to the independence, but sort of just experiencing a different culture and different people, language, all these sorts of things that are quite centric to places, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, I was quite, like, I worked in Tesco in Loughborough during uni, so I knew quite a lot of the locals already, and like I had a lot of friends there already, so it wasn't like a massive adjustment for me to, suddenly go from Loughborough to London to come back again. And not go home as such. Like, it wasn't a huge adjustment because I already knew quite a few people there already.
And what were the sort of work that you were doing? Was it more Was it still quite big brand work, or was it smaller day-to-day bread and butter work?
Yeah, it was. We had quite a few fairly large brands. They are a smaller agency, so it isn't sort of the stuff I'm working on at Oliver. Um, but there was still, a good variety of different brands that I was doing all sorts of work for, like a bit of branding, social media, some print. So yeah, it was good variety of work for sure. And I think that was really helpful to go from, working as an in-house designer to an agency, to know that actually I want to be in an agency and I want to work on different brands all the time, do loads of different work all the time, and not sort of be contained to one space.
Yeah, it's funny that, isn't it? That that dynamic. It's quite strange. I've done both, and it's in some respects they're both quite rewarding. But I think it's more down to who you are individually. If you
Yeah,
like diversity, and if you like different experiences, or if you're quite, maybe if you care or you're passionate about a certain industry or topic, then finding an in-house role is really beneficial, isn't it?
yeah, for sure.
So finding that role at Mint, what was that process like? Did you feel like you got fortunate to find it, or were you having to apply to a lot of different places to get your foot in the door?
Um, it came about quite well for me at the time. It felt quite random, because it sort of was like through a recruiter, which when I was applying for my placements, they weren't through recruiters. A lot of them were sort of companies contacting Loughborough because they knew they had a good placement scheme to say, oh, get your students to apply for this. But that was my first interaction with a recruiter, and I was a bit unsure about how to navigate that at the time. But yeah, so that was, to me at the time, it felt a little bit random because I hadn't directly applied somewhere like I had every other time. And then someone else applying for me on my behalf. So that felt a bit strange, but yeah, looking back, it's a completely normal thing now, and I love recruiters. It's so much easier.
Again, I think we need a lot more educational conversations around things like recruitment, because it does come with connotations of, dark arts and mystical land of nobody really knows how it works or how you find these places. But that must have been interesting then from a portfolio perspective. What did that look like for you at the time? Was it university work? Was it the work that you'd had from privately, or you'd done anything self-initiate?
Yeah, so I think at that time I had 2 or 3 university projects in, but like I said, because of sort of always showing up at Debenhams and getting to know the senior designers really well and the design directors and art directors really well, I was given a lot of opportunities there. So I think at that time I was probably the only designer that had worked across every sort of design aspect of the business. So I did a little bit of print, I did a little bit of sort of the website, emails, social. So for me, I was lucky enough to have enough work from Debenhams to showcase, okay, I've had exposure in all these different areas of design. They might just be for one client, but that sort of took up a lot of my portfolio as well. And I think it doesn't necessarily matter where you work. I think a big thing for, employers is that you can work in a team, and you understand how an office functions, and you understand, the process behind it. But yeah, I think a lot of my portfolio when applying for Mint was in-house work, but that didn't put them off. They saw that I had, my university projects in there as well, which were a little bit different. And they did set me a task, which completely fair, completely understandable, for a completely different client to Debenhams. So yeah, they had an opportunity to like test my skills out before before making an offer.
That must have been really good to have that Debenhams work, because I would have thought from their Mint's perspective, it didn't necessarily. I think there's a bit of a tendency to try and put in these massive projects into portfolios, where it's sort of like, you've created Madonna's latest album or something like that, and it gets sometimes people try and blow people's socks off without realising that showing the day-to-day work, being able to handle many different projects or dimensions or things with print or digital, you can do a multitude of things, is really important to show that. Did you find that?
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, I think even just sort of knowing how an office operates, knowing who your key stakeholders are, and knowing how to, a simple thing as knowing how to email someone is so important. So I think, yeah, for Mint at the time, I think that was probably a big reason as to why they hired me as well as a junior designer.
Yeah, and I've had a hell of a lot of conversations recently about the practical skills of graduates. And those, like you say, those what sound like a very simple thing, but when you've been doing it for 20 years, everything sounds relatively simple. But like, just
Yeah.
how to talk to people within the studio environment, being part of a team, practical
Yeah.
things, talking to a client, there's certain things that we all still need to be ourselves, but there are certain ways that you need to navigate
Go
this sort of
about
thing. Yeah, so having that knowledge, even just a small amount of that knowledge, is invaluable, I would have thought, to an employer, especially if somebody at a junior age, junior role, sorry, that's that's an icing on the cake, I would have thought. The last thing I want to talk about with uni, the last time I want to mention uni, sorry, what did that look like in the sense of your mum agreed, you sort of say you're not going to go back? Did you literally not go back? Or do you have to
Yeah.
tell them that you're not going back? Do you have to do anything to sort of?
I mean, I put my form in to like defer for a year. So at that time, like when I first had the conversation with one of my lecturers about not going back for a year, that I had to submit a form, and that was fine. And then, yeah, I think like it got to the end, well, close to when I was meant to go back, and they reached out, and I just kind of said to them, oh yeah, so I'm not coming back. And they were like, oh, okay, but also like you've got 1 year left. It's big, big waste. Like I was like, no, I'm just not going to come back. Sorry. They were like, would you want to speak to someone? I was like, no, I've made up my mind. um, it must have, like, for them, it must have been really weird for someone to drop out, because I mean, Loughborough's got a really good like retention rate on students and people graduating. They've got a really strong like creative course all around, like even the fine art and product design courses are really successful. And then for someone to not come back, it was like, oh no, what have we done? They didn't do anything. It was a great uni.
Oh my God. Yeah, I like the idea of that meeting where they just go, "What? You're not coming back? What's going
Yeah.
on?" I was just scratching their head, looking around, thinking, "This is strange. I've never experienced this before." I mean, I did it once. One of my first jobs when I worked in a sports shop, I went on my lunch and I didn't come back, and it was quite
Oh,
liberating. It was, just walked off, and I'm not having, not taking any more of this rubbish. Like, but I would love to have seen their faces, thinking, "Where's he gone?" That's the longest lunch break ever. It's lasted for like 38 years, I think, this year. Yeah.
oh, that's brilliant.
But sometimes though you can't. I think you need to break free of the things that you feel that are restricting you, don't you, or aren't for you. And again, it's sort of this idea that we have to uphold these traditions just because everybody else has done it before us, and it doesn't mean it applies to everybody. It's a fair play for breaking the rules. That's always appreciated. So moving on to Oliver. Now I've known of Oliver for a hell of a long time, very well respected. That is quite from the outside, that's quite a leap from where you've been previously. How did that come around? Talk us through that from your previous to get into that opportunity.
Yeah. So I was so after Mint, I went back to Next I went to Next, so in-house designer again for a little while. I think just because I wanted to make sure the direction I wanted to take my career. And yeah, some personal circumstances outside of work kind of made me take a little bit of a break. But then it was a little bit bizarre how I landed the Oliver job. Like, again, I went through a recruiter, but from my first interview to being made an offer, it took 3 days, which was a little bit crazy. um, and I know some people would say that's a red flag, but honestly, I love where I work, and it's such a lovely company. I had my first interview was with my head of design, who I spoke through my portfolio, showed him the different types of work I can do, and then I think my second interview, which was about 3 days later, was with my now manager. And again, she was sort of just telling me about Oliver, about the culture, showed me it, like I showed her a little bit in my portfolio. But one thing I really liked about that whole process was there wasn't a design task. They saw my work in my portfolio, trusted I'd be like, with this work, trusted I'd be a good fit for the team. And I think for them, they were more looking for a personal match rather than someone that needs to have all these big clients and all these amazing elaborate skills. I think they just look more for a personal fit. And I know Oliver actively don't employ people with like do employ people without degrees. So they don't really consider your education as a leading factor as to why they'd employ you. So yeah, it was a bizarre interview process. Like 3 days was a bit mental, but
Sounds pretty good though, doesn't it? You know, just keep the ball rolling sort of type thing. You sound like something that's very much a seize the day type character. You know, you're very much you know, proactive. It's not just sort of rolling with, you know, going with the flow. It's like you want something, you go for it. Is that a fair assumption?
yeah, for sure. That sums me up pretty well, to be honest. Yeah, I mean, even reaching out to you to do this, you know, maybe a year ago, I probably wouldn't have. Although I've always wanted to, like, do some talks and, you know, mentoring and sharing my story. I think, yeah, I'm definitely a seize the day kind of person.
I think it's really refreshing. I think it can be easy for the person, say yourself, to sort of when people talk about your character, it can be quite weird, can't it? It's a bit strange to sort of
Yeah, yeah.
but like what I always try and remember or try to remember is that it's for the people that will potentially hear this, for them to think that's achievable. Like somebody that's maybe because you're a female, might be because you're of a certain age, might be because of where you've come from. That
Mhm.
relatability is so important. Is that other people will think, I can do that too. They might not be as confident. They might not have that mentality, but they'll realise that because somebody before them has done it differently, that
Yeah.
opens the door for other people to do things their way. It
I
might not be
mean,
perfect, but it'll be different.
yeah, I mean, like I always tell myself, what's the worst that can happen? The only thing they can do is say no, or
Yeah.
like someone will just say no, and then you just deal with it, and then you know, it's not the end of the world, is it?
Well, exactly. Yeah, it's most things are reversible, aren't they? You know, as long as you don't do anything drastically bad, you know, we can always you know change direction and shift patterns and stuff. When you went back into somewhere like Next, going back into the client side in house, what was that? Was that like a bit of a light bulb to sort of say, actually, no, I don't want to do this. It was then now I want to go back into agency life.
I mean, yes and no. Like Next was a whole different like ball game to Debenhams. They're such an interesting company all around. Like, definitely learned a lot of skills there. Um, it wasn't so much the like, oh, I miss the agency life. It was just like I say, a few things were happening and I just sort of needed to take a step back from work in general. And yeah, Oliver just kind of happened when I was ready to start applying again. And I had a few other I was applying for a few other different places as well. But yeah, it wasn't so much I left Next because it was like an in-house role again. I don't think that really made a difference to my decision.
So for someone like Oliver, I'm fascinated to know a bit more about the internal workings. Like I say, I don't have any knowledge from inside, but from the outside, I've quite a lot of um, London or big city um, companies that work in the creative space. You know, they're not really pigeonholed into one thing. They do quite a lot of different stuff. But what I'm really interested in is the sort of the internal culture. So you've mentioned
Yeah.
that you know, the team being very supportive, looking for people maybe without degrees, quite fast paced. They don't do tasks. I'm not really sure where I sit with the task thing. I can sort of think I can
Well,
understand it for certain size agencies. For other ones, that are sometimes a
yeah.
bit
I
restrictive.
mean, now I refuse to do them. If I ever apply for like a job, I will not do it because for me, I just think I have enough work to showcase a variety of different skills in my portfolio now. If there's something missing, tell me, and I'll be able to show you a client that I've done this for. But I've had a few cases, and I'm not going to name names, but I've had work stolen from tasks, like down to the color, like the hex code. That's how
What
precise it was.
by the people that you were being applying to?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, and got ghosted, and yeah, it's frustrating. So for me, I'm so like anti-task now, unless there is a certain thing in my portfolio they're really looking for and I haven't showcased it, I'll ask. um, and like I say, with the mint job, I did that task because all I had in my portfolio was Debenhams.
But also, like, I think the idea of something not being in your portfolio would be extremely specific and maybe a bit unjust to sort of say you're not suitable for this because of that one. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
a bit like, I find it frustrating when clients ask if you work with anybody else in this industry. Sort of, you just want to say to them, I don't think it really matters. You've got knowledge of creativity, of branding, all the rest of it. It doesn't matter if you've been specifically worked with somebody in children's footwear.
yeah.
It often all boils down to the same thing. You're trying to solve problems, aren't you? And you use
Mhm.
those same skills across all sectors. But what was interesting when I talk about the culture of something like Oliver is that I think those few points that you mentioned, like say tasks, potentially people without degrees, the hiring process was fun and enjoyable, and the people that you now know that you work with. But these are all sort of micro points that, when you combine, create a culture that is very enjoyable, exciting, engaging, all those sorts.
Yeah, it's so diverse. Like it's the most diverse place I've worked, and I love it. I love it for that. Yeah, like on my immediate team, we've got people from so many different countries and cultures. It's really interesting. Like obviously hearing stories from them growing up, even to like, we'll laugh at certain phrases and how like English people say certain things, and it's such a lovely culture there. And they definitely do make an effort to sort of employ people from all different backgrounds. No matter what, no matter what their education or family or anything like that. So
I think that's ever so important to really focus, to make an effort. It's so people can say that they're diverse, can't you? It's an easy thing to throw around, but unless you
yeah,
proactively ensure that everybody gets a fair trial, which is probably not the right word, but fair, throw at the dice. I think this is something our industry, well, the world as a whole, but our industry is doing more of. But I think it needs to take inspiration from those that are doing it well, as opposed to
yeah, for
it's
sure.
it's a big task, but it's definitely one that's being addressed, I think. I hope. From a perspective of the future, not trying to get you into trouble with anybody, but where do you see yourself going? You've crammed in a hell of a lot. I'm not going to ask you your age. I'm not that horrible. But you seem to have
Oh,
you've crammed a lot in.
yeah, I mean it's quite interesting because like my age now, people are sort of just graduating uni or just getting into their careers now. But I've already had like 2 to 3 more years sort of working experience. So I mean in the next 5, and I'm not sure this is unrealistic, but I'd love to sort of get to that creative lead or creative director role. I'd love to, work for a brand or an agency that I feel really passionate about, and sort of help, lead some lead a little creative team. We'll see how it goes though.
Yeah, the limits it's only set by yourself, isn't it? I wouldn't be predetermined
Oh
by.
yeah, 100%.
I don't think age shouldn't really apply to any of these sort of things. If you're ready for it and you're right for it, then
Yeah, I agree with you completely on that. Yeah, I think a few people are sometimes they either think I'm older than I am or younger than I am. Never get my age. So
have you found any sort of, not necessarily negativity, but any sort of barriers because you didn't go through the uni, or even from the other side, people that have actually followed it through and then maybe see where you're at. There's any sort of jealousy or any negativity in that.
no, not necessarily. Like I have some really close friends that I went to uni with, and I met up with one of them the other day, and we were sort of discussing, my whole decision to not go back to uni. And she said to me at the time when I was and ahhing about it, she said, "Look, Alex, you've just landed the job that all of us are going to be fighting for in like 6 months' time. So why go back just to go back again?" She was very like, stay at this job, you know, work hard at this job and you'll be fine. Doesn't matter whether you have a degree or not. But she went back to uni and she got a degree and she's doing really, really well now. She works at another, like a agency called the Creative Clinic. And yeah, loving it, absolutely loving it. So I don't think it really makes a difference. And I was never really hit with any sort of criticism in my choice not to go back. Yeah, I was very lucky that, you know, I have very supportive friends.
It's testament or evidence that both ways are achievable. You know, it's
Yeah,
you know,
for
it's
sure.
we don't have to. I think this talk all boils down to just finding a path that works for you wherever you're at any given point.
Yeah, definitely.
Does it? I think as we're coming towards the end, Alex, is there anything that if you were looking back, you think that you might do differently? Or I'm not a big fan of sort of trying to advise other people because you've got to live it in a way that's
Yeah.
where you know where the situations you find yourself at any given point. But you know, are there any sort of things that you might advise if you were talking to somebody that was just starting out on that education journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing for me would be don't doubt yourself. Stick with your decision, see it through, and it will be fine. Even if you don't get the outcome you wanted, at least you know you got that outcome. And I don't like living with like what if. So that's why I always put myself out there. That's why I'm a go-getter. Like the worst they can do is say no. Um, yeah, I don't like living with like what if. And yeah, see a decision through, even if it's not the outcome you want.